our friends at SCN. Every year they do the SCN Top 50. What does a list like this mean for consultants? Zero.
Sorry, it doesn't mean very much. This list to me is like an award that you pay for.
Mostly, I think it's a bit of an ego trip for the leaders at these companies, a little bit.
I think Kelly nailed it. It's the marketing version of a Maserati.
Ooh.
Meaning for the person who buys the car. Meaning.
No, I'm just Maseratis in my head now. Thank you.
And this is what I think of it.
Securing AV networks, more acquisitions, and the SCN Top 50 is out. All that and more next on AVWeek. This is AVWeek, episode 642, recorded Friday, December 8th, 2023. AV Threat Security. This is AVWeek, your weekly wrap-up of the biggest AV stories of the week. My name is Tim Albright. I am your host. With us to discuss the news and information we have got this week. First and foremost, Bren Walker from Kirkegaard. Welcome, ma'am.
Hi, Tim. How are you? Thanks for having me again.
I am. Good to see you. Good to see you as always. Callie Perkins is here. She is from the farm. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
That doesn't mean that Kelly runs a tractor. It's the name of it. Explain to people what the farm is.
The farm is a rep firm, and we also provide professional services like programming and commissioning.
All right. Last but not least, a young man who I snuck into his place of business after he was gone. Fernando Mora is from the 9/11 Museum in New York City. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back and calling me a young man. Appreciate it.
It's all relative, brother. It's all relative.
Far from that.
If you listened to last week's AV Week, I was in New York at the Poly Experience Center. Thank you again to Poly for hosting us, Poly and HP. Great time at Pace University again, and thanks again to the Bald AV guys for having me out there and talking to 200 high school students who were interested in the AV and IT industry. That was, cool. Yeah. I know it's a week ago, guys, but it's still, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was getting impressive. First story comes to us from SCN, our friends at SCN. Every year they do the SCN Top 50. Really quickly before I start this, a little bit of clarification. AVNation is owned by CTI. CTI is not on this list because we don't submit to the list. This is a self-reported list. Top 50. All right. So I'm not going to talk bad about anybody, but here is the thing. Understand that going in. This year's top 50 list ranks commercial AV installation companies by revenue. It is a mix this year. AVI-SPL returned to the number one slot with substantial installation revenue growth and new hires, while Diversified is now also one of the billion-dollar companies. Despite holding a position, Pavilion gained $50 million, and Washington Professional Systems increased revenue. By contrast, Level 3 Audiovisual and IVCI experienced slightly lower annual revenues from installations. Rounding out the top five, and actually number 5 is tied. AVI-SPL came in at $1.5 billion, Diversified at $1 billion. Rico, which we will talk about here in a second, at $465 million. AVI Systems at $428. Solotech and Solutions were the two that were tied for the 5th, came in at $260 million. Bren, start with you. Bren designs really fancy, incredible systems all over the world. What does a list like this mean for consultants? Zero. If you're not watching the video, Bren's giving a big fat zero.
Zero. Sorry, it doesn't mean very much. This list to me is like an award that you pay for, right? I'm happy for them, and I hope that it translates into bigger bonuses and such for the people working on their staffs. But for us, the problems that we have with integration still remain the problems we have with integration. I mean, I'm in Washington, D.C. right now for this past week. We had a VIXA board meeting, and one of my board colleagues who works at a fairly large company, Fortune 500, basically said if when I call an integrator, they have out of however big their staff is, a third of them know what they're doing. And I get the third that know what they're doing because I'm a big company. So I don't think, there's still the problem in integration with a lack of staff and a lack of qualified staff. So this is great for those companies, and it's awesome. It's a great marketing piece and everything. And it certainly speaks to the overall market for integration and the power of Pro AV. But beyond that, it doesn't mean much to me.
Really quickly, we're all going to have issues with staffing for a while. I don't think that's going away. Go ahead, Fernando.
Yeah, I'm in the exact same camp as Bren is, and I've seen this list for probably over a decade. And to me, it just feels like it's a marketing situation, something that an integrator could put on their slide deck when trying to influence. I hate to be that cynical, but to influence a prospective customer or an existing customer to stay with them. It doesn't necessarily mean much, and I get the feeling they'll tell you the same thing. A self-paid for award is probably as best as I would put it. Although I would say it gives you a good snapshot of where our industry is. So it does have some usefulness. I appreciate the fact that there's some AV companies now in the $1 billion space, which is pretty impressive considering how difficult it is to with razor thin margins and things like that our industry faces, that we can actually, there are some companies that are kind of making that kind of money. I know that those companies are basically swallowing up smaller integrators around the country and around the world, and that's the reason possibly for those numbers. But it is a snapshot of where our industry is. And I think what it means more is just more consolidation amongst the big ones. So you notice that there's the top two, top five are in the hundreds of millions and close to some in the millions, billions, I should say. But most of them are in the $10-12 million range, those mom and pops that are the backbone of our industry. And those are the ones that really understand what it's like to be, I don't want to say on the ground, it's kind of an overused term, but, understanding that you pick a particular vertical and you're good at that vertical. And if you try to get too big, you may lose your shirt because you just don't, especially nowadays, post-COVID, have the talent. Like a small mom and pop can't do a stadium. They can't do a museum. Leave that to the diversifieds and electrosonics of the world. So they can't branch out unless they hire within or train within to do those types of projects to get to that level. And I suspect that the top guys are going to stay the top, and the middle are going to stay in the middle for the most part, unless they self-report and say they made more money than they probably did, or maybe pull forward projects from next year and do some messing around with different numbers. But generally speaking, I use it for just a snapshot of what our industry is, and that's basically it's a lot of consolidation starting in this industry at the top.
One thing I would say to counter that, at least in our world, we hardly ever work with the big guys because it's just a mixed bag of what you might get in terms of that office, right?
Yeah, depends on the office, because
it depends on the office, and if that office in that market is not competitive with another local that knows how to do an auditorium well or knows how to do a recording studio well, they're not going to get it, right? And we've become more educated about which of the large company offices have the right talent to do the work for the projects that we have, and they have to be there. This is not a situation where you can only have so much of the team not actually in the geographical region where the project is. And I've seen enough situations where people try to have the programmer is Arizona, but the project is in Tennessee. And it's a nightmare because, the increase of software codec in the system means that programmer actually needs to be there.
That's absolutely true. I worked for one of those integrators for decades. And what typically would happen is, depending on the project, you have that one core office for, I would say, for example, SPL before the merger. The guys out of Columbia, Maryland were the ones that did all the big jobs. Were the guys that would travel. Our New York office was pretty adept at some of these things, but the big projects typically are handled by the core group of the head engineers of those large organizations. So if you're going to do a stadium, it's going to most likely the guy's going to come out of the headquarters, Kenilworth for Diversified, in Tampa for Electrosonic, or even AVI, SPL. So it's typically those guys are the workhorses of industries, and they do all the large projects. But the smaller stuff that the regional offices do can get a little muddled. By the small, I mean under 500,000, under $1 million, those are probably handled by the local branch. But the bigger projects, the higher profile projects, are most likely done by their top teams.
All right, Kelly, let's get your 2 cents on this. Kelly's been around the industry for a minute. She not only worked for an integrator, but also for a manufacturer. So what does this list mean?
I would agree with Fernando on it gives you a snapshot of where kind of our industry sits and who's kind of moving, who's acquiring, who's merging, who's kind of gone away. I would also agree that it's marketing fluff to an extent, because there is no evidence or proof of how much these companies have made or projected, or how many employees they have. But mostly I think it's a bit of an ego trip for the leaders at these companies, a little bit. I think they get to say, well, I'm the biggest and the best and blah, blah, blah. Right. But ultimately, it is a snapshot. And I think it's also, an interesting marketing tool for manufacturers, distributors, and those folks in our industry, because now they have a list of who the big people are and who they need to go after. And, pipelines, shift and plans change based a little bit on this list too. So it's giving you a little insight into kind of who are the up and comers, who people need to focus on. So I think there's a little bit of that on the manufacturing side too.
I think Kelly nailed it. It's the marketing version of a Maserati.
Ooh.
If you meaning for the person who buys the car, meaning.
No, I'm just Maseratis in my head now. Thank you.
It shows something. Maybe it makes up for something else you don't feel so confident about, to be able to say, yeah, we were in the top 50. We were number 2. We were number 1.
Next time, I'm not going to touch that with a 50-foot pole. The next story comes to us from actually darn near anybody. Go ahead and look it up. I believe it's even on our website. Audio equipment manufacturer RØDE has acquired Mackie from Loud Audio, further expanding RØDE's pro audio range. Founded in 1989, Mackie is known for its affordable audio mixers and speakers for recording studios, home use, and live sound reinforcement. The deal establishes RØDE's parent company, the Friedman Group, as a leading global pro audio brand, combining Mackie's expertise in mixing consoles and live sound with RØDE's microphones and recording equipment. RØDE founder Peter Friedman said, quote unquote, Mackie's pedigree of live sound expertise is simply unmatched, and the acquisition creates a premier audio technology company. Fernando, we'll start with you on this. A little bit like last story, it's a bit of a snapshot in the industry, 100% acquisition. What does this mean to higher ed users? What does this mean to corporate AV users that either leverage Mackie and or RØDE or both?
Well, what I would say, first I'll start off with the fact that Mackie is one of those companies that is kind of a little bit of a beloved brand between those of us that have been in the industry for a long time. We all started off as either failed musicians or failed DJs or something along those lines in the AV industry. So everyone owned a Mackie back in the days. And there were good mixers for small spaces, but along comes this company RØDE, and I think for the most part it's because of the creator economy. And I'm going to answer your question in a minute, but the creator economy basically is what it's being used for. So those two companies together seem to be a good fit for this post-COVID world, and podcasts and YouTubers and all this other stuff, and everybody wants to be the new Marcus Brownlee and things like that, but. That's not my vertical in terms of schools. I would only add the fact that I realize that those schools and churches and things like that are places with limited budgets, so they can better afford these lower priced devices as opposed to the big guys like Sennheiser and Yamaha and things like that. So that seems to be a better fit for that, and quite honestly, for what they typically would do. They're not doing large productions. They're not doing, things that will require, very expensive professional equipment. This, to me, would kind of live in the prosumer world. And that is, to me, just as good for what they're doing. I'm not saying that some churches can do pretty large productions. Go to Texas and you can see that. But and some schools might. But for the most part, most schools are not doing large-scale productions. Most churches are pretty small with their budgets. They're doing modest production. So this lives right in their world, right in their space. So that seems to be a good fit.
All right. Kelly, same question. What does this mean to the industry, and what does this mean for their users?
Well, I had to look up who actually owned Mackie before, because I was like, I know it's one of those big companies. I'm not sure, and I don't. I'll be completely honest. I'm not super familiar with Mackie. I'm not a hardcore audio person. I bought a Rode microphone years ago to bring with me to do case studies and interviews on the road. Oh, see, I did a little pun there. Sorry. But I mean, if you want, to me, Rode seems like you said, Fernando, it seems like, portable. It seems like podcasting. It seems more like somebody like myself would use it in a marketing role. And if Mackie is more in that realm, then I think it's probably a good fit.
I agree with Fernando on the prosumer side. I think that one quote that you read, I mean, Mackie used to mean something a long time ago in terms of live sound, but I can't remember. I can't remember the last time we specified one. And road gear we don't deal with at all. So, I mean, it's glad to see the brand around and surviving, and hopefully this merger gives them some juice to get back to the position that they describe. But I don't think the position they describe is the reality anymore. If I were advising someone who is doing their own podcast setup, and they want or they plan to do multi-track recording beyond like 4 tracks, Mackie or Behringer or one of those would work for them fine. But honestly, Behringer is bad as did I say that? Sorry, I shouldn't say things like that.
Cost effective.
Cost effective, right? As cost effective as the Behringer consoles are, there's weakness there, and there's an opportunity for Mackie to gain part of that back if their new owner puts the dollars behind it and make sure that they remain reliable gear, because that's the main issue with that price point is the reliability after a couple of years.
There's room in that space for them right now, especially with the creator economy exploding the way it has been since COVID. There's a decent group of people that want to work from home and want to have the freedom of, inviting a few people over, throw a few mics out, throw up a mic, throw up a camera, and then let's have a conversation similar to what we're doing right now. This is prevalent throughout this entire space. So
yeah, one thing I will say is that I think at least on the studio side, there's a lot of there's a loss of available market on the studio side, because at least in what I see in higher ed, smaller schools, high schools, they're not putting in any physical mixer at all. Right, they're doing everything out of the box of the computer, and everything is digital faders. So in some of those smaller applications where people are not opting for a physical mix surface, that has shrunk that part of the market considerably. So
you're using Pro Tools.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No, it's absolutely nothing wrong with it.
Says the old Pro Tools kit. So. Last story comes to us from our friends over at Innovate Across the Pond. The Convergence of AV and IT has introduced new cybersecurity threats as more devices connect to external networks, enabling remote access. Integrators report an increase in sophisticated attacks like ransomware, directly targeting vulnerabilities in AV systems. With hybrid working, widespread manufacturers and integrators alike are prioritizing security in product design and engaging clients on best practices. Experts call for greater collaboration across the industry to stay ahead of threats through education, setting standards, and sharing intelligence on the ever-evolving threat landscape. Couple pieces here before I start with you, Kelly. Number one, state of California here in the States, they have set up a piece of legislation that says if your device has a password, the second you open it up, you have to change the password. Now, Crestron, Extron, Sennheiser, whoever, they're not going to make a California-specific device, meaning that if you're in the States, you're going to have to change your password. That, to me, is the lowest fruit that we can do in the industry, right? Now, 10 years ago, you could have password as your password, right? Whatever. Now you have to change the default password on any device that touches the network and if it has a password. Beyond that, Kelly, how do we do that? Like, how do we educate the industry? How do we tell manufacturers, distributors, and the users of this equipment that this is a real threat? There's an interview I did probably 10 years ago now, and I was having a conversation with a CTO of a major manufacturer. I'm not going to say who, but the comment that came back to me when we started talking about security is, what's the worst thing they're going to do? Hack the projector. And it was incredibly short-sighted even 10 years ago. Now, the industry has matured since then. Don't misunderstand. And that company has put actual honest-to-God security in place. But there are still some remnants of that mentality left in the industry of, oh, what's the worst thing they're going to do? They're going to lower and raise the screen. Who cares? No, it's a real issue. So how do we get that education out there? How do we communicate that to everybody in the chain?
Well, just as an organization putting together a plan, right? Maybe it's hiring a consultant or a firm or someone. We've all sat through those videos of, don't wire your down payment on your house to, this person or whatever, or don't send gift cards to the text message I got this morning from so-and-so and then wipe off the thing, which just happened in our organization, by the way. So it's still happening. But yeah, I think just educating, putting together a plan in your organization. I think the manufacturers should take it very seriously. I don't know about you guys, but I've talked to at least 3 or 4 very large manufacturers in our industry that got hacked within the last few years that are now doing, have very stringent plans and guidelines in place. So I think mainly just educating your employees, educating the channel, like you said, on specific steps and plans of how to handle that. Because I think people just, you don't know what you don't know.
All right, Bren, how do we get this out there? How do we communicate the seriousness of this?
I'll say this, that I think it's not impossible, but it's a challenge to get people to understand the security threat until it happens to them, right?
Okay.
Once it happens to them, then they invest in the organization to make sure that they have the right protocols in place and that their staff is appropriately trained. Until it happens, a lot of firms just aren't going to make that investment. A lot of companies just aren't going to make that investment. But what I will say about this, and there was one line in the article that spoke directly to this issue, there's no reason why an AV network should be on an enterprise network. AV devices should not be on the enterprise network. And if it's a matter of how you design the system, and that making sure that if you're dealing with an entity that does not have a robust IT department that can speak to the way the AV network should connect with their enterprise network, then the designer needs to, and the consultant needs to inform them and educate them and help them see how everything needs to be structured. All of our projects that we design, it's separate AV network, and then usually we'll have, there may be a device that has 2 NICs in it so that it can connect to the internet, or it may have some connection to the enterprise. But most of the devices on that network, if you hack to them, you can't get anywhere else except to the other AV devices. So that to me goes beyond the password thing. That's the other way to stop AV from being a point of vulnerability, is in your network design. And I'll also add that we are now, I would say within the last year or so, we've started as a part of our design. We are doing a network riser diagram, and we are talking, we're showing our client, here's what this network is going to look like, and here's the points where it is going to have any sort of intersection with yours. And then let's talk about, what the protocols are if there is some kind of attack on the AV system. But that's something that our firm, we've never needed to do before, but we do it now. And we're talking with IT now before we ship our final construction documents. So it's in the documents, and that helps with the build out of the system. And frankly, it helps integrators, because integrators may or may not have that level of knowledge to understand how things should be set up. So overall, I think it's all about how you plan it and design it, and communicating it. We're gonna go through what we go through in terms of more people experiencing it, and some wise leaders will use their budgets appropriately and protect themselves, and others will roll the dice, especially if they are, as Fernando mentioned before, have lean margins. So,
all right, Fernando, you'll have the last word on this. How do we get this out there?
I think I agree with a lot of what Bren said. It's just a change of mindset. There are some of us that have been in the industry for a long time and just never really had to really think about internet security as to do with our devices, where now we obviously have to do. So there's a skill set that us old guys have to acquire and take seriously. I would say the AV industry takes it very seriously. I think there might be there might be a gap in terms of knowledge of what would that happen for us. For example, 9/11 Museum, our experience is very audiovisual centric. It's based around the audiovisual experience. So if our systems get hacked, then we're basically refunding tickets. So for us, it doesn't necessarily have to be an attack on the enterprise network. An attack on the AV network would be catastrophic enough for us if there's some sort of ransomware. That would, obviously, we're somewhat of a high profile venue, so it would literally be on the news the next day. So for us, and I'm not going to discuss what steps we take other than hiring consultants is one of the things. What you don't know is what you don't know. So you hire the best. You hire people to do pen tests for you. You hire people to do these things. You institute two-factor authentication for everything. Whatever you need to do, you have your phone with you for the most part, and you authenticate on your phone and on the computer, and you isolate your AV network from the enterprise network. Everybody knows step one, AV network. You should never have any AV devices on that network. And if you have, IT director worth half his chops, that's the first thing he's going to do. And any engineer would, first thing you do, isolation, not complete. You're going to have to talk to it from the enterprise network, but you put these things in places where it's very difficult to get from one network to the other. Not that these cyber criminals can't do that, because they're just as talented as anyone else out there. These things are, these cyber criminals, that's an industry now. It's they're an industry with actual tech support, believe it or not. If you have a scenario where they encrypted all your data, and you don't know how to decrypt the data, or you don't know anything about Bitcoin, they will actually help you out with that, believe it or not. I've read articles about that. So, we're talking some people with some pretty serious chops and how to get around. Our systems are a little different. If they're very AV centric, they don't necessarily, play well with what they might know, but it's still a very serious situation that we need to take very seriously. And I do, but the mindset of the industry might not be that.
One of the things that I was surprised about from that story is the notion that hybrid work is driving this. So many organizations already had remote workers, or people who would work from outside of the office, right? So it sort of suggests that if they didn't have security issues with their remote workers before, it sort of makes you think that this is an end user issue for the people who are now working remotely who weren't before. And that those people, and we know that a lot of security vulnerability comes to the human being at the machine, right?
Yep.
It's going to always be, always.
So properly educating people who are working remotely, who weren't working remotely before, would go a long way to preventing some things. However, like Fernando said, if their job is to figure out the attack, your job isn't necessarily to figure out the attack, but to stop attacks. Your effort to stop is going to be based on a known universe of things that you've seen before, and the attacker's trying to do something you've never seen before, and they're very focused on that. So in many ways it has to be a part of business that we just ongoing accept, the same way retailers accept that they're going to have a certain amount of shoplifting. So what are your systems to prevent that?
Thank God. I tell my mom all the time, I'm like, if it looks weird, it's weird. It's not right. Don't download it. Don't click it.
There are various steps you can do. Look at the URL. Look at it, and does it look right? Does the URL go back to Facebook.com, or does it go back to something that's completely ridiculous? That at Facebook.org. That's obviously, those are one of the first things that you need to look at.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much. Bren Walker from Kirkegaard. Thank you, ma'am. How do people connect with you or Kirkegaard?
At Kirkegaard.com, and you can get me. My email is bren@Kirkegaard.com, and I am sporadically on LinkedIn, Brenda J. Walker. The testing for the AV Network Professional Credential will open up on December 15th.
And you should go get that. I know a couple of guys that are already signed up for it. So, all right, very good. Kelly Perkins, thank you, ma'am. How do people connect with you, with the farm, or with Save?
The farm is thefarmav.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Kelly P. Perkins, and Save Sustainability in AV is saveav.org.
All right, very good. Mr. Fernando, thank you, sir. How do people connect with you?
LinkedIn. I don't do the X's or the Twitters or anything like that. LinkedIn.
All right, very good.
I don't blame
for
you.
us, don't follow me on any of it because I'm still complaining about the Bears season. Go to the website. I know, Bren. Don't talk. Your Browns are doing better than the Bears.
We have hope.
Forget about the Giants.
You have hope, which sometimes is worse. Just for the record, AVNation. .tv. That's AVNation.tv. Couple really cool things this month already. Number one, our annual AVNation Reader's Choice Awards. The nomination process is up and rolling, so go by the website and tell us what the best things that happened in the AV industry was, whether it's the best education or the best projector or who you think should be the AVNation AV Professional of the Year. So that's one thing. Second, if you're headed to ISE, which I know Bren is, so we get to hang out a bit, the AV and Kelly. The AV Tweet Up is happening at the HD-Base-T stand in conjunction with us and Commercial Integrator and their 40 under 40. So that is Tuesday, the 30th of January from 4 to 6 p.m. Barcelona time, CET, I think is what it's called. So register for both of those at avnation.tv. It's avnation.tv. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. That is all the time we have for AV.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AV Nation.
This is AV Nation.